Hi, I'm Tom Hendrickson from the DevOps Online Summit, and welcome to our sponsor interview with Chris Hendrix. This session is brought to you by Blameless, the industry's first end-to-end SRE platform. To learn more, go to bit.ly/dos-blameless to learn more. Chris, we welcome you to the program. Why don't you introduce yourself to the people here at the DevOps Online Summit?
Thanks for having me. My name is Christopher Hendrix. I am a staff software engineer and developer evangelist at Blameless.
Excellent. So how long have you been with Blameless, Chris?
I've been with Blameless since September of 2020, so it's been about 8 months now.
Yeah.
Before that, I was working as a consultant and engineer, and I've brought all of that into my role. And now I'm really interested in bringing that knowledge to the SRE community, as particularly developer evangelism.
Excellent. Excellent. So to kind of kick us off, Chris, your title is SRE as an Organizational Transformation, Lessons from the Activist Organizer. So tell us what that means to Chris Hendrix.
Sure, yeah. So I come to this, like I said, with a consulting background. And in particular, we used to help organizations transform themselves. Back in the day, it could have been agile transformations or XP transformations. This is the DevOps Online Summit, and we're talking about DevOps transformations. SRE is an extension, SRE transformations. In reality, though, companies will always have various different ways of working, and through practice, the industry has figured out that there are certain principles and practices that you can use and bring to your organization to unlock benefits. And for many people who are a part of those organizations, they might be a part of that transformation. They might be on the receiving end of that transformation. But some people might be interested in helping to lead or support those transformation efforts. And in particular, one of the failure patterns that I have seen both as a consultant and just broadly in the industry is the industry believes in the marketplace of ideas and the meritocracy of ideas. So they kind of think that, like, if you just say the words SRE in your organization or point them at one blog post, then the best ideas will float to the surface and someone will change their minds about something and suddenly we'll be doing SRE. And anyone who's been in the industry knows that that's not at all how it works, right? Transformation takes time. And even the aspects of just changing people's minds, changing people's behaviors, influencing people to see the merits and benefits of these practices is actually work. Yeah. And I'm really interested in that work as a consultant who helps people perform this transformation because you have to do it over and over again. But I am also a volunteer. And I volunteer with activist organizers. In my background, it's particularly with people working on racial justice and prison abolition movements, all those kinds of things. But in general, activist organizers are also in this space. It is their job to influence people to change their minds and change their behaviors. They're usually working with public policy or politicians, but we can actually learn from how they approach their job. And that, to me, is what I wanted to bring to this talk.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I think, like, as you mentioned, really this is all change, whether it's an SRE transformation or like you're talking about racial justice or something. There's fundamental parts of change, isn't there, Chris?
Yes. Absolutely. And in particular, one of the things that we often see is you're trying to influence a person. Oftentimes, when we're in an organization and trying to change an organization, sometimes that means changing the CEO's mind or a VP's mind. When you're an activist organizer, it's changing a politician's mind or also a CEO if you're trying to change corporate behavior or corporate influence. So in general, they're both really interested in the idea of how do you manage a campaign to change someone's mind.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So I know, Chris, in your write-up, you said we want to talk and treat a transformation as its own project. So tell us why we need to do that and why that's important.
Yeah, this goes back to that same idea of the failure of the marketplace of ideas. And in general, you need to guide an organization through these kinds of transformations. So, for instance, if you have even just 3 teams that are changing, and there are 5 people on each team, that's 15 people who need to be brought along with what it means to be operating in a new way. And that usually involves things like training them. It usually involves things like identifying what practices are being performed now that need to be changed in the future. One of the really big ones that I see very often, which is broadly general across the SRE transformation, agile transformation, XP transformation, is changing the way that teams are structured and report to each other, how they communicate. It takes effort and work to break the patterns of how they were operating in the past, provide them a template or guidance for what it could look like, and actually bring them along the journey from point A to point B. And the larger the organization, the more complicated that entire project or process gets. If you have middle managers and many layers of middle managers, you now have to deal with reporting structures. You now have to deal with people who have adverse incentive structures that are preventing them from wanting to change. You have to activate all layers of your organization. You have to change the VP's mind as well as the director's minds and the middle manager's minds and the IC's minds, all while trying to bring them to new practices. And so what I mean by it's a project is that it is work. And so this only succeeds, or rather, this succeeds most often when it is given a group of people with the authority and the accountability to make these kinds of changes, who have the broadest and highest level of influence potentially. They are backed by as many leaders in this transformational movement as possible, and they are regularly reporting on what they're doing, and people are clearing space for them to make these changes.
How can we, if we want to lead a change like this, Chris, how can we start to develop, because I'm thinking about the people who are going to watch this on the DevOps Online Summit. A lot of them are going to be, like you mentioned, SRE people, DevOps professionals. They're going to be lower level, but they're going to have to manage up, essentially, is a term I've heard used. But how can we maybe develop maybe some allies or people to influence as we, work up through those ranks of the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. The analogy that I like to talk about is concentrated power versus people power. And concentrated power is a person who has the authority already, right? So a CEO, a VP, a CXO, anything like that. Those people have been vested with the authority by virtue of their title, and the organization looks to them to make these kinds of decisions. So that's concentrated power, and those are oftentimes the people who we're trying to influence. There is an alternative view of power, which is people power, which is what activist organizers work with. And people power is how many people are all saying the same thing and demanding the same thing. So you can imagine if you have on one side someone with concentrated power, and then you have only 3 people who are all saying 3 different things, there's no pressure there. There is no heat there. People power is getting as many people as possible organized, talking to each other, using the same language, making the same demands, asking for the same things, and doing it regularly. And the organization of those people is the work that's necessary to develop people power. So that's just the broad principle. And I, in particular, love one way of doing that. I start with a book club. I love starting with a book club because book clubs are a natural way to get a group of people reading the same material, using the same language, interested in the same subject, given the same information, and that organization, the fact that you have to get people meeting together, whether you're making a Slack channel for all of these people, you're making regular calendar requests, that group of people can start off by reading this book and finish after the book is over by continuing to meet by continuing to be organized, and by working together on the broader campaign. So I like to use that as the seed for a larger transformational movement, especially if you're in an organization that either doesn't have it on its radar yet, or anything that could be preventing the progress of this kind of transformational movement, like SRE or DevOps or Agile or XP.
So I just want to get into that a little bit there, Chris. You talked about the people power, the book club. My guess is, I think what you're trying to focus is that alignment of the group. So like you mentioned, using the same terminology, but kind of aligning where do we want to go? We know we're here, but we want to go here. We want to get to this SRE transformation, or we want to lead this change, this DevOps change, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about making sure that everyone is saying the same thing, and shares the same ideas for what that future looks like, right? Because that's what leadership is in a very real sense. Is even if the organization doesn't know what it will look like, or they feel like they're in the dark, the leaders of these movements are the ones who are asking publicly, trust me, give me your trust. I will take you to a place that you may not know exists yet.
Yeah. So I guess you've talked about, the people power. We get a group together, we get people aligned. Then how do we get it, I guess, take it from that group, so whatever you want to call that group that we have, and then push it up to management? What are some things after that?
Yeah. So activist organizers actually have a practice that is called power mapping. So you can Google this. This is a great thing to Google. Look up power mapping exercise, maybe with the word activist or something like that. But in general, the first thing that you must do is understand your organization. You have to understand what are the various elements of power, who are the people in play, what are their thoughts on this movement, who do they talk to, who do they rely on, who do they look towards, who do they support. And this power mapping exercise not only lets you see the organization for the people that are underneath it, but one of the things that I like to get folks who perform this power mapping exercise to do is to also categorize the people in this map along what we call the spectrum of allies. So the spectrum of allies is this idea, which is very simple, that on any given position, there are people who are at a range all the way from active opposition to active support.
Yeah.
And there's active opposition, passive opposition, neutral, passive support, active support. And the reason why this is valuable, there are several reasons why this is valuable. When you are looking for people to bring into the fold, the easiest people to start with are obviously your active allies, your active supporters. People who are passive supporters are people who generally agree with you, and it is your job to activate them, get them tapped into your organization, get them tapped into what your demands or requests are, and to utilize them as part of your people power. So get them saying the same things publicly, doing the work to be active in this larger movement. For people who are neutral, this is where it gets interesting. One of the things about the spectrum of allies is you probably will not get someone to move more than one quadrant. It is very unlikely that I will get someone who is neutral to my message to become an active supporter. And I shouldn't hold myself to that, because that's asking too much of myself. Same thing with active opposition and passive opposition. The most that I can do for an active opponent is to get them to become a passive opponent and stop actively advocating against the things that I'm advocating for. The most I can get a passive opponent is to get them to be neutral on the subject. And that's good enough.
Yeah.
And in general, you don't even want to target your active opponents, because it's too much energy for very little gain. And if people power is really about getting as many people as possible performing the same things, it's much more useful to spend your time and energy trying to bring into the fold people who are neutral or passive allies or active allies. Now, the power mapping exercise will then tell you what the VPs or directors or CEOs, where they land on this broad subject. And from there, you can begin to strategize with this group of people on maybe a campaign to influence them. And now that you've done this power mapping exercise, you can see who those people in power depend on, who influences them, and you can begin to work your way up potentially, or work your way in on this organization to really aid in this transformational movement.
Yeah. Now, Chris, it's interesting. I really like this idea, but one thing that I'm kind of coming to as I think about that, I've been involved with various transformations throughout my career, and you've probably seen this too. You get some movement and then things stall out. What are some tips maybe you have to share with people if we've been part of a transformation for maybe it's been a year and the results haven't gotten to where maybe we wanted to? What are some things that kind of restart or maybe redirect energy?
Yeah. I think it's always a good idea to reorganize, to get the people who. So often what happens when things fizzle out is that your communications have fizzled out, your regular talking and discussions have fizzled out, your channels for talking with your allies have fizzled out. And that usually happens because people have very limited resources in terms of energy, and we have very limited resources in terms of change. And change anxiety is very real. So it's very easy to burn out on these kinds of things. If you see that the problem is that you have lost your own organization on the side of the people who are trying to push for this transformation, start there. Start by, getting everyone to do something fun together. Just do something to get people talking to each other again, to get them feeling good, which is often something that people are lacking, because again, if you're in this transformational movement and you're getting any kind of opposition, you can feel really down and bad about how this is working. So get people re-energized. I don't know, pizza party or something like that
Food always helps, right?
Yeah, food always helps. I think also this idea of kind of a reinception, get people reconnected to the value that you're trying to derive. So oftentimes these just get branded as like an SRE transformation or something, and you lose the connection between what it is that you're actually advocating for and why you're advocating for it. So, do another exercise that actually gets you to analyze your organization again and say, like, what are the things that why did we come to this in the first place? What were the things that we saw that were going wrong in the organization that we thought this would help with? Is it still a problem? Because it might not be, right? And then maybe it is worth stalling out your transformational movement, but getting people to re-engage with the why behind it usually brings back some of that enthusiasm and helps to reignite. I think also in general, being very aware of the rhythm of applying pressure, like you pointed to, is just something to always keep in the back of your mind. Like I just said, energy is a depletable resource, change is a depletable resource, ability to change is a depletable resource. And you don't want to push so hard, so quickly that you actually cause an impediment for yourself and prevent further progress. You want to be providing either a steady amount of low pressure or rhythms of pressure and pulling back, and pressure and pulling back, enough to cause minor changes a little bit at a time, and then allow things to settle for a little bit. That allows people to kind of catch their breath and get ready for another wave of change.
Yeah. Chris, you've shared a lot with us. Any closing thoughts?
I really want to inspire people to see the humanity behind the industry that we work in, we oftentimes are so invested in the technological improvements or the technological solutions to these things that we forget that there are very real humans who are all interested in doing the best that they can every day. So really center yourself and center your transformational movement in that idea, and I think you'll do great.
Thanks for coming on, Chris.
Thank you.
This session is brought to you by Blameless, the industry's first end-to-end SRE platform. Go to bit.ly/dos-blameless to learn more. On behalf of Chris Hendrix, I am Tom Hendrickson for the DevOps Online Summit.